matters are unfolding at a very serious scale on the Gaza border, and now we are at the cusp of seeing an Israeli entry, and we don't know what that now means. There are roughly 2 million residents in Gaza. The Israelis and the Israeli Defense Forces have now told the residents of northern Gaza that they have created safe corridors, which is basically roads connecting the north to the south, for them to shift to the southern part, because their tanks, their army, their special forces are going to roll in. This is not the border as we see it between India, Pakistan, LOC, LAC. The border is so strange, and I've recently been there, that you'll have a residential building which is in Gaza. On the second floor of the building, Hamas will be firing rockets. On the third and fourth floor will be ordinary civilians living. On the other side, just a few hundred meters away, there will be an Israeli settlement. The Hamas terrorists that have gone across the border have particularly gone to these settlements, the kibbutz, and targeted people where the maximum number of fatalities have happened, from the music festival and these places. The construction is so meshed with the civilians that you simply can't do rocket strikes and aerial strikes and take out Hamas. If they're shooting from a balcony in which there are civilians living on top, what do? Do they willfully use civilians as human shields? Absolutely, yes, they do. So the Israelis are going to go in. Now, what we don't know is, are they going to go in, do a cleanup operation, and then go out? Is that going to be a few weeks, a few months? Are they going to go in to stay? If so, an already crowded Gaza Strip, what happens to the 2 million people? Will the Egyptians open the border and let some of them in? Many say they won't. What happens then? It's a serious turn to what, of course, is serious developments which are yet to happen and have already happened. The amount of brutality that we've seen from Hamas, the amount of horrendous videos, photography that we've seen come out, the people that have been tortured, then raped, then disemboweled, then killed, who have been held hostage, is an act of terror which even we in India, who have dealt with 26/11, who have dealt with the parliament attack, can't really comprehend to the level and the ferocity of what happened. But the larger questions at play over here, let me quickly open them up to conversation. Joining us on the broadcast, Ambassador Basmati Mukherjee is with us, Major General Sudhakar Ji is with us, Vail Awadh is joining us, and Jordan Cope is joining us on the broadcast as well. Ambassador Mukherjee, what's your best bet, ma'am? When they say they're going in, I think I'll take them at their word that they intend to go in. But is that going to be for a short duration, an extended duration, a sort of semi-permanent structure? What do you suspect is going to happen once the actual physical occupation begins?
It would appear to me, Rishabh, that no self-respecting government in Israel or any other country for that matter, that means India, could take this kind of horrific losses, civilian losses, torture, deaths, women, children being decapitated, without exhibiting some form of retribution. And that is where it becomes tricky. I was reading The Economist editorial today. An Economist, as you know, is a very conservative journal. And The Economist said that the level of Israeli retribution has to be very carefully judged by the Israelis, so that the survivors of the Holocaust do not create a humanitarian catastrophe which in some ways could equal, as far as casualty numbers are concerned, the Holocaust itself. And why do I say so? I've been posted in Egypt at a time when India did not have diplomatic relations with Israel. It was a very long time ago. Camp David had just happened. This business of humanitarian corridors has got two problems. One is that some of the roads are in very bad condition. Secondly, it is very difficult to move 1 million people from one part of a densely, very, very densely populated strip of land to another part. And you were asking the very interesting question as to why Egypt will not open the borders. That's a very interesting question. And that is one of the paradoxes that Israel faces. The Arabs, despite their verbal support, and I'm sure Dr. Awad will perhaps contradict me on this, but my assessment, having served in Egypt, is Egypt will not open its border points. Even if they do, they will let in only a small trickle of people. The neighboring Arab states of the Gaza Strip, the Arabs, while giving sympathy, they do not want a flood of Palestinians in their land. And why not? Because these are educated Palestinians, very intelligent people. They understand their rights. They understand dictatorship in Arab countries. If they move into Arab lands, they will bring with them those very concepts which are anathema to the governments that rule those Arab countries. So they are not going to be allowed in, Rishabh. Maybe a few, those who have a lot of money, those who've got American passport, those who've got French passports, etc. So they are all going to be cooped up like chickens waiting for slaughter in a tiny little strip of land, waiting for God to save them. Now what happens is, as you rightly pointed out, these Hamas people who are very medieval, very devious and very cruel, they are going to use civilians as shields, knowing that it's very difficult also for an Israeli soldier, given his background, given that he knows what happens, how his country was created, to just go in and blindly slaughter 100,000 innocent civilians, men, women and children. Even if Hamas has done it to them, it's difficult. In fact, one of the rules of warfare, as General Sudhakar would tell you, is that professional armies are not trained to kill civilians like chickens and goats. Professional armies are trained to fight soldiers, which is what happened in the first war. Now in this one, because Hamas came and did what they did, it leaves Israel with very, very few options. Israel is between a rock and a hard place. So I very much fear, Rishabh, that we will go in, there will be large-scale slaughter, and we will have to handle the fallout.
Okay, it's not peaked yet. Let's put some images on your screens. And what you've been seeing on your screens currently. So these are images of the evacuation beginning. So some people are taking the threat seriously and they're leaving. They're piling up their belongings on their cars, trying to get whatever public transport here. Here's another photograph. This is en route evacuating northern Gaza. As you can see, amongst several buildings which are already in rubble. You can see more families here moving out. Here's another photograph. Women with children, people leaving with belongings on whatever they can find. This is a dump truck which is being utilized. Others are waiting. This is another truck which is being utilized. Literally more bikes. Now there's a visual which you've just seen on your screens, and that is Hamas putting IEDs on the route connecting North and South Gaza, blowing up Palestinians who are trying to leave, basically trying to stop them from leaving. So General Sudhakar, now we talked about conundrums. Now here's the biggest of conundrums. Now I've seen this with my own eyes. So there will be an innocuous looking residential building. From the balcony of the second floor, Hamas will be stockpiling and firing rockets. On the third and fourth floor will be Palestinian civilians living. You can't take out that building from the air with a drone strike or an air strike. So what do? You say, okay, we're going to go in. Once you go in, If you leave, they just come back. So then you have to stay. If you have to stay, where do these people go? It's a massive conundrum, sir. How do we solve it? What is the obvious logical way forward, if any?
Rishabh, I'll come to the response part a little later, but let me first of all compliment you. You have described the objective which military people, professionals, even after very high standards of training, cannot explain. I was dealing with the subject when I was in service, and the way you have explained in one, you see, Hamas are a way of life. Our colleague, our friend, co-panelist will bear me out. They're a way of life in Gaza Strip. And when we talk about these people, yesterday I think Uday was the anchor. We had a very healthy and very productive discussion in your channel. I got a lot of comments from the people abroad, across Atlantic. The issue which stands out is these people are unidentifiable. They're non-entity. They actually they merge with the civil population. It is a way of life and the culture. So although there are terrorist organizations, it is very difficult. So therefore, it brings me to the point I would like to endorse what Ambassador Ma'am has said. You see, the fighting in built-up area, in an environment obtaining in Gaza Strip, is going to be very challenging. It is very simple to say, take them on, precision airstrike, just knock off the building. It is the kind of collateral damage it will entail. Possibly it may lead to a kind of another Holocaust for the same people who have gone through the journey, the disaster of a Holocaust. So therefore, it actually brings me to a point that a very meticulous, calibrated approach has to be adopted. You may have large number of tanks, you may have guns, but they cannot be applied onto a target because there are, apart from those 6 or 8 Hamas who are in one of the floors, there are 200 civilians who are also living in different flats and floors. Therefore, it requires very selective approach. It requires troops intensive, infantry combat who are trained for this kind of fighting in built-up area. They need to fight through the lanes. They need to fight. The house clearance drill has to be undertaken by specialist troops. They have to go from room to room. They have to identify people. And when you actually come across the Hamas, it's not written on the head or on the sleeves that they're the Hamas. They're like any other civilian. So it's a very challenging task, Rishabh,
okay,
you have highlighted.
all right. So let me just touch upon this. So on drawing an assumption, okay, and there are war aims. So we have to now identify what these war aims are. On the larger picture, elimination of Hamas's ability to target either through rockets or through infiltration Israeli settlements. So that's the larger picture. So on the assumption, General Sudhakar, that the Israeli intelligence and the IDF have a list. They have identified X number of Hamas operatives. Is it a possibility that they go in and are targeting only these X number of Hamas people whom they know? You're right, some of them will be unidentifiable, but some they will for sure have a list. And once they have settled that they have targeted enough of these who have been either killed or arrested, that they can leave. Is that a possibility, sir?
Excellent point, Rishabh. I was coming to this only. I have interacted with the Israeli troops. They are the best in the world today. When they go in for such kind of strike or neutralization of the objective or the target, they carry out a very professional preparation. And that preparation entails, identification of the target, preparation of the individual the terrorist personality card, his height, weight, all the features, everything is actually tabulated. They carry out thorough briefing that in so-and-so room, so-and-so person is likely to be there. It's a very high standard of military operation. But despite that, Rishabh, what happens is these people, they don't stay in the same flat or same floor. They keep moving up and down. This is, also, there is another thing, Rishabh, since you've been to the area, you would have seen. They have developed an expertise of digging tunnels which are as deep as 200 meters under the earth. Although Israelis, they have a seismic sensors, they can pick up the tunnels. But these, over the years, from 2005, 2006, they have been developing these tunnels. And the tunnels are interconnected between one house to another, from one colony, like we say, mullahs, mohallas, from one mohalla to another mohalla. So these are very dicey operations, very dangerous. One has to have lots of patience and needs to actually carry out very selective
Okay.
surgical precision target neutralization rather than going for absolute,
Okay.
knocking of the building.
Okay, so let's be clear on war aims. Okay, so there's a general war aim that the Israelis obviously clearly have. So what's the war aim of Hamas? They know they can't win a conventional war. They know they can't go and occupy all of Israel. So what's the war aim? The war aim can only be, number one, create enough disruption through a crisis that any rapprochement that is going on, I2, U2, Abraham Accords, that all of that has to be shelved. And number two, ensure that enough civilians are killed by the Israelis by provoking them for long enough, by killing them, and hope that the public opinion globally changes. These can be only to the two war aims, because certainly they're not marching to Jerusalem anytime soon. So let me get Jordan Cope into this conversation. Jordan, it's been a difficult situation now for 1,000 years, let alone the last 60, let alone the last 6 days. How does this play out? What does an Israeli force entering Gaza entail?
First, thank you for hosting me on the show. And before I answer that, I want to push back on two quick uses of terminology that I believe are incorrect. One is the term settlements. Under international law, the way this definition has been applied is not consistent to how it's been applied right here and right now. These homes on the other side of the Gaza border are Israeli homes. It's in Israeli territory. This is not disputed. The other is the terminology we're throwing around the Holocaust. 6 million people were massacred because of their Jewish identity, and strictly because of their Jewish identity. They were not terrorists. They did not commit actions of terror. And they were not targeted because they were massacring innocent civilians, butchering them, beheading them, burning them alive. Regarding what I think Israel ultimately is trying to do here, and with respect to the panelists, I think Israel is ultimately going to try to go and dismantle Hamas. And as the generals previously mentioned, Israel has one of the best militaries in the world, and it's specifically specialized in what is urban warfare. Israel, in the past, has intervened in Gaza. It hasn't worked through airstrikes, and now it needs to go on the ground to free the 150 hostages that have been taken from all around the world. The whole world is watching right now as Israel is deploying its troops, endangering their troops' lives to save citizens of not only Jews, who just experienced the worst massacre since the Holocaust, but those belonging to other peoples around the world, such as the French, the Americans, who just lost 27 of their own, the Nepalese and the Thai. And so what do I think will ultimately emerge from this? This conflict right now could escalate into something much larger that has been developing for a long time. And the one country we haven't talked about right now is Iran. Iran has installed these proxies all throughout the Middle East, whether it be Hamas in the Gaza Strip, whether it be Hezbollah that has a stockpile of 150,000 rockets, some of them precision guided. And Iran and Hezbollah have implied their interest in intervening in the future. This is an Iran-coordinated strategy, and it can combust into something serious. And even though we're focusing on Israel and Gaza right now, there's a much greater effort at play by Iran to deploy proxies that have the intent to destroy Israel and to promote Jewish genocide. And Israel, with Gaza on its border, with Gaza just minutes away from Israeli cities where there are homes of Jews and Muslims. Muslims have also been killed, by the way, and about, I believe, 1/3 to 1/4 of all rockets, all 5,000 of which recently deployed by Hamas, will tragically also hit and land within the Gaza Strip. This is a nightmare, but it's one that Israel has given credence to for far too long since it left the Gaza Strip in 2005, in an attempt to give those in Gaza the opportunity to establish statehood, to establish peace, and it didn't work.
Okay, so Jordan, let's examine this. You've taken a slightly bird's eye view, so before I come back, so let's look at the bird's eye view. So the risks of an Egyptian, Jordanian, going further, Saudi, Emirati, other intervention, as has happened in the past, in wars that Israel has had to fight, don't really seem to be existent. On the northern frontier in Lebanon, for sure, it's already started. And yes, Hezbollah is probably going to escalate it further. I've been into the tunnels in that area as well myself. So that's going to happen. So if you are saying Iran is playing the proxy here, what is Iran looking to gain from this?
Iran wants regional influence, and this is part of the greater Shiite Islamist crescent that Iran has tried to push on the Middle East. It's invested in militant groups in Iraq, whether that be the Mahdi army or Kataib Hezbollah in Lebanon and Syria. Hezbollah has fired rockets from Lebanon and Syria into Israel. Yemen with the Houthis, Iran has been one of the biggest suppliers. And right now, Iran has been meeting with members of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It tried to meet with them in Beirut. It might have met with them in Damascus and Beirut. That needs to be followed up upon. But Iran ultimately has its own vision of Shiite Islamism, which is to create a Shiite Middle East in which there is no state of Israel. And it's to no coincidence that it's funding terrorist groups that aspire for Israel's destruction. And we talk about perhaps Hamas not having the capabilities now to destroy Israel, but when there is a front, when Israel has to fight on three fronts between Israel, Syria, the Gaza Strip, and potentially Iran, it's going to be a very difficult fight, and it's going to preoccupy Israel as Iran now has enough nuclear material to produce a nuclear bomb in 2 weeks if it aspires to do so.
Okay.
We are seeing a very dangerous Middle East right now.
Okay, so now let's come back to the specific. I mentioned at the very beginning, because I've seen the houses myself, if you have Hamas on a second floor balcony firing rockets, and the civilians living on the third and fourth floor, there is no aerial intervention that can sort this out. So when we say go in and dismantle Hamas, what does that really mean?
I think it's a good question, and I would like to add that Israel does have some military capabilities to take out single stories. I've seen the photos with my own eyes. I constantly delve into research in both Hebrew and Arabic. So warfare is tragic. It's inevitable that civilians do die in warfare. But the question is, can Israel do its best to minimize it, and has it done so in the past? I would argue yes. It's going to be tragic, but Israel at first needs to deal with the hostages in Gaza and to deal with Hamas. But it also needs to keep a very wary eye on the northern border with Lebanon and Syria, and as well as what Iran is ultimately aspiring to do with its nuclear weapons future program. It's a very dangerous Middle East right now, and Israel has a lot of cleaning up to do. And the ultimate reality is people who are telling Israel right now that it doesn't have a right to respond after its neighbors right next on its border have massacred Jews in the most brutal of way, as well as Muslim citizens of its own, is to basically tell Israel that it's okay for its citizens to die, to lay down, and to expect nothing from the world. And it's just an unacceptable precedent, and it's shameful that the United Nations has not designated Hamas as a terrorist organization in its Security Council. And India has been a strong friend of Israel, and I hope that India can follow through on this friendship and designate Hamas as well.
Okay, that's a specific point, and I think that makes eminent sense. There's no reason not to do it. In fact, it was surprising to all of us that it hadn't been done already, because we, of course, share the same frustrations with the global community. So let me get Ambassador Mukherjee. Ambassador Mukherjee, you take that thought, and I have a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
I wanted to clarify to our colleagues that when we talk of the Holocaust, it is important to remember that the Holocaust was perpetrated by Christians upon Jews, not by the Palestinians. That's the first point. It's important to remember. One has to be accurate in one's history. Secondly, when we speak about a Holocaust-type situation developing, this was not intended to undermine in any way the atrocities and horrors of the Holocaust, which Hitler and his goons decided to eliminate an entire population. The point that I was trying to make, and I'm sorry if it was misunderstood, is that the descendants of the survivors of the Holocaust have a special responsibility, in my perspective, to ensure that nobody makes any other comparison, because the two brothers of Abraham, who are forever divided because the land belonged to one, then it belonged to the other and came back to the other, each of them have to live in peace. So when it is said that the Gaza Strip belongs to Israel, I would like to just add as an Indian that if the Gaza Strip and everything belongs to Israel, then where will the uprooted Palestinians go, since the other Arab countries are not willing to accommodate them? We cannot throw them into the ocean.
All right. So let me follow up with the question, ma'am. So, so knowing full well that forget that the borders probably won't open to any large numbers, and also knowing full well that this is what Hamas wants. They want large civilian casualties, so that the imagery on our screens changes from Israelis and Jews dying to Palestinians dying. And then we forget about how it started. We only remember what's happening right now. Now, knowing full well this is what they want. They are trying to kill people who are trying to flee because they don't want them to leave. Knowing full well what can actually be done about it.
I think that if our guest from Israel says that, and I'm sure he must be right, that the Israeli army has the capacity to take out single buildings, etc. That definitely I am in favor of the Israeli army going in and taking out these monsters who have behaved in the most inhuman and atrocious manner. I am merely concerned that in the process, and that's why I'm surprised that The Economist has written about it being a very conservative magazine, that in the process, the peace process, we were on the cusp of a historic agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia, for example. We were in the process of establishing an India, Middle East, Europe corridor from India through Israel to Europe, which would have brought prosperity to these regions. We have not talked about the hidden Chinese hand. But apart from Iran, I would like to remind my colleague, our guest here, that there is also a hidden Chinese motive in derailing the peace accord, in ensuring that the Israelis cannot live in peace. Why? Because they don't want the power balance to shift in favor of Israel, the West and India. That's why they are trying to do all that they can from the back to derail the process.
Okay, so, absolutely. I think we are at the nub of the problem. Okay, that's what's going on. And of course, people are dying because of geostrategic reasons, and that's how it ends up. But General Sudhakar, that doesn't take away from the fact that a military intervention is about to happen. Now, in a forewarned operation, how you save the hostages once they know that you're coming is a difficult one. How do you actually go in and have an exit plan? And we've seen the best of countries with the biggest of armies, the most powerful armies, have an entry plan but have no exit plan. Whether it was Iraq, whether it was Afghanistan, not to have an exit plan, it complicates the whole situation. So what should be a tactical, if the strategic issue is a bit different, what should be the tactical objective here?
Very relevant points you have made, Rishabh. 2-3 things. I think somewhere in between you asked what is the political aim or the military aim and objective, because everything is correlated, In our exercise or in our operation as it is unfolding today, for all you know, when we are having a discussion, the Israeli soldiers or the IDF has already encircled where the people are being held hostage. They have got the expertise. They have got the past precedents of successful, rescue of the hostages. So the Helibon operations are there. They have a large number of hand-picked snipers. They have got the best of snipers in the world. So they take pot shot before they engage the target. So I'm coming back to the point of your tactical significance or the strategic issue of this operation. All I would say is that there are efforts which are already underway. The stakeholders, as per my research and study, Qatar is a very important country which has been supporting. Iran goes without doubt. China, which Ambassador Ma'am has actually very rightfully underscored. China is the elephant in the room. We are missing the woods for the trees. This country, any amount of flagging would still go less if we do not highlight the involvement of China. The basic objective of China is to shift the focus from Central Europe to Middle East, so that the battle fatigue which is setting in Central Europe, in Ukraine and Russia, does not propel or compel the the Western bloc to gravitate its resources towards Indo-Pacific, because China is not ready to undertake any kind of conflict or engage in any kind of conflict. So be that as it may, also it wants to contain and also contest and confront any kind of global development taking place to undermine its BRI efforts, particularly West Asia. So therefore, for all you know, this Hamas thing was all fine so far. Nothing was happening. Everything was hunky-dory. Why has it happened just 7 days or 14 days prior to the peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel? This is the question.
No, we know exactly why. So it's got nothing to do with Al-Aqsa. It's got nothing to do with Jerusalem. It's got nothing to do with Gaza or the West Bank or the liberty or the of the Palestinians. It's got nothing to do with any of that. We know what it's got to do about, but that doesn't take away from what is going to happen over the next few days. Jordan, I'll leave the last word with you. It is a complex situation. It has been, for beyond living memory, a complex situation. Here we are. Israel has, forget a right to respond, it would seem incompetent if it didn't respond at all. I mean, we had a horrific terror attack in which Jews were targeted in Mumbai, and for several years we were just sending demarches and notes and dossiers and doing nothing about it, which is to our humiliation and subsequent embarrassment. So of course you need to respond, but then what's the exit plan? If you have an entry plan and a reason to enter, how does one actually exit?
And I think this is a very valid question, and I agree with some of my panelists here on their points about China. I definitely do think China is trying to disrupt world order and to create ultimately momentum for its One Belt Maritime Silk Road initiative, of which it has tried in the past to target Haifa as a port. I think we need to ultimately look at this also from the big picture. And another country we're missing is Qatar, which is one of Hamas's largest funders, approximately $360 million a year, I've read in recent reports, $1.8 billion since 2012. Qatar is one of the wealthiest countries in terms of GDP per capita, and it's influencing Islamist movements all throughout the world through its Al Jazeera network, while also funding American universities to the tune of $5 billion since the 1980s. And so if we really want to combat the media war, which is perpetuating this conflict, we need to start with Qatar, and we need to start with Turkey as well, with its TRT world, and with Turkey, which has hosted high-profile members of Hamas in Turkey, such as Salah al-Aruri, the head of the military wing of Hamas. And we need to hold these countries accountable. Qatar is also hosting one of the heads of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh. What's the exit plan for Israel? That's a question that remains uncertain. We've seen Israel's presence in the West Bank, and ultimately, to a significant degree, it has reduced terrorism. And Israeli civilians, even though still targeted by Palestinian terrorist organizations in Israel, with the Palestinian Authority giving hundreds of millions of dollars for its Pay for Slave fund to motivate people to murder Israeli civilians and to receive a stipend in return. We ultimately understand that terrorism is a tragic reality. But what Israel ultimately decides is a gesture that we should support, and we've seen in previous decades that Israel has chosen generally the moral and humane route, distributing flyers, urging civilians to evacuate. Which other army in the world does this? Which other army in the world does this? We need India and the United States and global leaders and democracies around the world to continue in their support for Israel, because at the end of the day, the cause of human rights depends on its supporters.
Yeah, I don't think there's any confusion on that. And if you're watching this broadcast, we've done several interviews with Jordan discussing Qatar specifically in the last few months. I'm sure they're still there on YouTube. You can find them, Turkey for sure and China for sure. I've run out of time in this specific conversation. It's obviously not an over one. There are a lot of reasons why this has been created, and it's been created.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.